A young woman lay trapped in a drainage tunnel for days, while the town, warned in advance, ignored the danger. The system meant to protect her stalled behind rules, protocols, and a chain of shrugged-off responsibility. But one veteran and his dog heard what no one else did and refused to wait for permission. Just listen to how this near tragedy unraveled and why, in the end, justice didn't ask for approval. Jack Mercer had come to Willow Creek to forget how to count minutes. He chose the town because it was small enough for silence, but not so small that silence started whispering back. His days were filled with routine. Mornings spent tending the soil in his modest backyard garden, afternoons fixing odds and ends around the neighborhood for folks who didn't ask too many questions. And the nights were sacred. A cup of coffee, Nova curled up by the fireplace, the hum of a muted baseball game. Safe, predictable. He needed them that way. Jack had learned in Kandahar that chaos often wore the face of randomness, but danger came in patterns. A flicker in the distance every 15 seconds meant a sniper testing your rhythm. A missing goat in the same alley 2 days in a row could mean a hidden IED under the dirt. Out there, you learned to see the repetition beneath the noise. And once you came home, if you were lucky, you learned to ignore it. But patterns had a way of demanding attention, especially when they broke the rules of comfort. It began on a Monday. At exactly 10:17 p.m., Nova, a lean black-and-white mutt Jack had adopted from a shelter 2 years prior, lifted her head from the floor and growled low in her throat. Then she barked. Just once, short, focused. Jack glanced up from the baseball highlights on TV, brow raised. He waited. Nothing followed. He chalked it up to a squirrel in the alley or a stray wind rattling the gutters. Nova settled down again. The next night it happened again. Same time, same bark. Only this time she didn't settle. She moved to the back door and sat, ears pricked, staring out into the shadows beyond the glass. By Wednesday, Jack had started watching the clock. Nova's bark came not a minute earlier, not a second late, 10:17 sharp. And each night she grew more agitated. First it was just barking, then came the pacing, then the whining. By Thursday she began pawing at the door, claws skittering softly against the wood, eyes fixed on a single direction, southwest, past the yard, beyond the trees, toward the river belt. Jack's house backed up to a narrow stretch of woodland, thick with cottonwoods and bordered by a runoff creek that led down to the river. Kids used to cut through there on the way to school in the spring. Hikers occasionally wandered the trails during the day, but at night the place went dead quiet. Or it was supposed to. Still, he resisted. For a man like Jack, silence was earned, and peace was not something you went trading away just because your dog had a feeling. He found excuses. Probably raccoons, he said out loud the third night, filling the silence like a man trying to drown out a memory. Or that loose fence panel on the Meyer side, maybe one of those battery-powered motion lights. But every explanation ran hollow, because Nova wasn't just barking. She was trying to tell him something. On Friday night, Jack made it to 10:17 without looking at the clock. But the second the minute clicked over, Nova launched into a sharp, rhythmic bark. 3 bursts, evenly spaced, like Morse code. Then silence. Then again. And something about that pattern, it stopped Jack cold. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. He muted the TV. The house fell into a hush so complete it almost buzzed in his ears. And then he heard it. Faint, distant, carried on the whisper of the wind curling through the cottonwoods. A chirp. Not organic, not natural, electronic. A tinny, high-pitched digital tone repeating at regular intervals. Not a bird, not the wind, not wildlife. Jack knew that sound. He'd heard it in the field, from medical equipment, from wristwatches, from radio beacons buried under rock and dust. It was mechanical, intentional, and it was coming from the river belt. Nova stood rigid by the door, tail still, body drawn tight like a wire. She wasn't barking anymore. She was waiting for him to move, for him to listen. Jack stayed frozen for a long moment, torn between two lives, the one he tried to build here and the one he thought he'd buried over there. His therapist called it boundary setting. Don't chase shadows, don't follow ghosts, don't mistake noise for meaning. But this wasn't noise. This was pattern, and patterns meant something. The flashlight was still hanging by the back door where he left it after fixing the broken shed light the week before. He reached for it slowly, as if each inch pulled him deeper into something he hadn't agreed to. Nova nudged his knee with her snout, not hard, just enough to say, "Come on, you know better than this." Jack let out a slow breath. "All right, girl," he muttered, "let's go find out what you've been hearing." The screen door creaked open. The night rushed in, cool, damp, alive. Jack stepped out onto the porch and flicked on the light. It cast a pale cone across the grass, but it didn't reach the fence line, where the trees began. Nova trotted ahead without hesitation, as if her path had been mapped for days. And Jack, against every quiet instinct that begged him to turn back, followed. They moved quickly, slipping through the backyard easement behind the old mechanics lot and cutting toward the narrow service road that ran alongside the levee. Willow Creek slept under a velvet sky, the stars dimmed by low clouds and the whisper of distant water. Jack's boots crunched on gravel as Nova pulled ahead, her body low and purposeful like a searchlight with a pulse. She wasn't barking now, just focused. Jack had never seen her this way, as if something in her bones had locked onto a frequency he couldn't hear. They passed the old water tower, a few dead streetlights, and finally reached the rusted chain slung low across the entrance to Mill Road, a utility access lane that hadn't seen real use in years. Jack ducked under the chain, heart beating louder now than it had in the quiet of his living room. Something about this stretch of the town had always made people uneasy. There were stories, teenage dares, runoff hazards, whispers of things that lived where the concrete met the river. Jack had never put much stock in rumors, but tonight the shadows felt different, weighted. The smell hit first. Wet iron, stagnant algae, mud and mildew. It was the scent of things that stayed hidden too long. It curled into his nose and settled at the back of his throat. Nova didn't hesitate. She tugged left, toward a concrete slope partially obscured by tall weeds. At its base yawned the drainage culvert, an enormous corrugated pipe framed by reinforced walls and rusted railings. A massive grate sealed the entrance, 6 thick iron hasps bolted shut with industrial-grade padlocks. It looked like a prison built to keep something inside. And there, echoing faintly in the damp night air, was the sound he'd heard from the porch. Chirp, high-pitched, mechanical, coming at 60-second intervals, clipped and unwavering. The sound of a timer, a signal, a machine doing its job without concern for whether anyone was listening. Nova stopped at the base of the grate, ears high, tail frozen, nose lifted toward the metal slats like a compass needle. She let out a low, anxious whine. Jack stepped beside her and raised his flashlight. The beam cut across the weathered grate, illuminating streaks of rust and moss. He aimed deeper, into the black mouth of the tunnel. The light swallowed whole within a few feet. The chirp came again, clearer this time, bouncing off the wet walls and back toward them. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice steady but unsure. It vanished into the darkness, swallowed like a stone dropped into deep water. There was no answer, just the wind. Nova began pawing at the concrete near the edge of the grate, whining more urgently. Then she stopped, abruptly, head cocked to the side like she'd heard something Jack hadn't. Jack turned off the flashlight. The night thickened. In that silence, he heard it. A scrape. Subtle, metallic, deliberate. And then, a breath. It didn't belong to him. It wasn't Nova's. It came from inside the tunnel, shallow and strained, the kind of breath a person took when each one cost them something. Jack dropped to his knees, heart pounding now in his ears. He laid flat, cheek to the cold concrete, and angled the flashlight through the lowest horizontal gap in the grate.
For a moment, the beam bounced off water, debris, and darkness. Then it caught something. Eyes. Human. Wide. Reflective. Blinking against the sudden glare. The shock hit Jack like a jolt. His body froze, but his mind cleared in an instant, instinct surging from the depths of memory. This wasn't a ghost story. This was real. Someone was in there. A voice, barely audible, crawled up from the shadows. "Please, help." It was hoarse, desperate, a whisper scraped raw by hours of silence and cold. Jack leaned in, lowering his voice, keeping it steady. "I'm Jack. I'm here now. I'm not leaving you. Can you tell me your name?" A long pause. Then, Harper. Harper Lane. The name hit Jack hard, familiar. He'd seen it 2 days ago, scrawled in red ink across a missing person flyer at the gas station register. 23 years old, last seen Monday night after her shift at the coffee shop by the library. Local girl, no known reason to vanish. Jack felt his pulse spike, but his voice remained calm. "Okay, Harper, I hear you. You're doing great. Just stay with me." Nova pressed her body against the grate now, low and unmoving, her chin resting on the cool metal, eyes locked on the shadows inside. She was still as stone, sensing the gravity of what they had found. Harper moved just enough to lift one trembling hand into the beam of Jack's flashlight. Her fingers were pale, the wrist marked by a tight black hair tie that looked like it had been worn for years. It clung now like a lifeline. The chirp cut in again, and Harper flinched visibly. "Phone alarm," she croaked. 10:17, that's when I always closed. I said it, just in case." She paused, swallowing hard. "It still goes." Jack didn't speak right away. He felt something break loose in his chest, something between awe and horror. This girl had been lying in a storm drain for days, keeping herself anchored to the world with the only tool she had, routine. A scheduled chirp, a minute-long cry into the dark, hoping someone, anyone, would hear it. And Nova had. 3 nights, no food, minimal water, cold concrete, and still alive, still listening, still fighting. Jack's hands moved fast now. He reached into his jacket for his phone, thumbed the emergency dial, and raised it to his ear. As it rang, he swept the flashlight across the grate again, then opened the camera to snap a quick photo of the locks and structure. He needed every detail ready. Someone would have to know where she was, how to get in, what tools to bring. There was no time for guessing. 911, what is your emergency? Jack kept his voice low, his eyes locked on Harper's outline. "This is Jack Mercer. I've located a missing person, Harper Lane. She's alive but trapped behind a drainage grate at the south culvert near Mill Road and the river. She's responsive but injured and cold. I need emergency services now. And I'll need help getting her out. The grate is sealed with multiple padlocks." Nova gave a quiet bark, as if to second the urgency. Her body remained braced against the concrete, her presence a lifeline Harper could feel, even if she couldn't touch. Jack stepped forward again, eyes on Harper. "Help's coming," he said gently. "Just hang on a little longer." There was a pause, then a tiny nod from inside the shadows. 3 days ago, no one had heard her. Tonight, someone finally had.
The sirens came first as a distant thread, a tremble in the wind just beyond the cottonwoods. Then they thickened into something more physical, a pulsing vibration that settled into Jack's ribs and reminded him of convoys approaching in the dead of night. The sound grew until it wasn't just noise, it was pressure. Urgency in red and white, barreling toward the culvert from 2 directions. Nova tensed beside him as the squad car rolled up, its headlights sweeping across the rusted grate like a spotlight on a stage. A town maintenance truck pulled in right behind it, tires crunching gravel. The emergency lights painted the concrete walls in rotating flashes of amber and crimson, bathing the scene in a surreal glow. The moment the vehicle stopped, doors opened in quick succession.
Officer Dana Whitaker moved first. She was lean, sharp-eyed, in her late 30s maybe, with the clipped pace of someone who had spent too many years watching people wait for permission to do what was right. She barely glanced at Jack before her eyes locked on the grate and the thin sliver of a shadow behind it. She dropped into a crouch, flashlight up, voice low. "How long has she been down there?" she asked, professional but shaken. "3 nights," Jack replied. "Her name's Harper Lane, 23, missing since Monday." Dana let out a slow breath and rose to her feet. Her hand was already on her radio. The town's crew chief arrived next, Cal Reynolds. Thick build, steel gray hair, work jacket stained from years of dealing with things no one wanted to deal with. He jogged over holding a heavy ring of keys, the metal prinking like church bells. "Bad section," Cal muttered, scanning the locks as he selected the first key. After the spring floods, this whole culvert system got flagged. Council ordered everything sealed up. Too much erosion, too many liability concerns. We were told, he hesitated, the key jamming slightly before sliding into place, to keep it locked. The first key didn't work. Jack was crouched near Nova, one hand on her collar, the other pressed against the concrete as if willing it to give. He stared at the heavy padlocks and the battered grate as if they were insults rather than obstacles. She's hypothermic, dehydrated. That tunnel's got water creeping in and God knows what else. She's been lying there for 3 days with a broken ankle. I need those locks off now. Cal glanced at the others from his crew, 2 younger guys standing uneasily behind the truck, and hesitated. His eyes dropped to the cutters bolted to the maintenance rack, and something flickered across his face. I can't cut without authorization. It's protocol." That word, protocol, slid into Jack's spine like ice. For a moment, the air seemed to still. The weight of the moment, the past, and the decision unmade hovered there like a stone waiting to drop. Jack stood, slowly, controlled. His voice was even, but something sharp simmered beneath the surface. "Protocol is gonna let her die," he said. "That's what you're saying." Cal didn't respond. He looked down at the lock again, as if hoping it might open itself out of guilt. But Jack wasn't finished. "She was walking home," he said, louder now. "Took a shortcut, fell in, and for 3 nights no one heard her except my dog. People knew this tunnel was dangerous. I heard someone mention a missing boardwalk grate at the feed store last week. You think anyone followed up?" Someone shrugged. That's what I remember. Shrugged. Just like that. His hands curled into fists. "For 4 nights I sat in my house, 10 minutes from this spot, while she lay in there with a phone that only chirped once a minute and hoped that someone might care enough to listen." Nova whined softly at his side, but Jack didn't look down. He was locked in now, not on Cal, not even on Dana, but on the slow, grinding truth that a string of decisions made out of caution, convenience, and delay had nearly written Harper Lane out of existence. "You want to talk about protocol?" Jack said, his voice quieter now, but laced with something harder than anger. "Fine. Just know this. Whatever's behind those locks is still alive, and if we wait for someone to give permission, we might be pulling her out cold instead of breathing." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Dana stepped forward, her jaw set. "I'll take the heat." Cal blinked. "You sure?" "I don't care if I lose stripes for this," she replied. "Cut the locks." When Cal still didn't move, Dana turned, walked to her trunk, and yanked open the emergency gear compartment. She grabbed the heavy bolt cutters herself, bright steel and scuffed rubber grips, and marched back to the grate. Without ceremony, she braced one foot on the concrete lip, positioned the blades on the first hasp, and bore down. Snap! The sound rang like a gunshot through the concrete chamber. The second lock gave way under the same pressure. Snap! Louder this time. Final. By the time she positioned the cutters on the third, sweat had gathered along her brow. The metal screamed as it cracked, like the tunnel itself was protesting. Snap! 3 down, 3 left. Water had begun to rise at Jack's feet, a thin ripple licking at the soles of his boots. He didn't need a weather report to know what that meant. Upstream release. Maybe someone opening a reservoir, maybe just runoff. Either way, time wasn't on their side. He knelt again near the opening and forced his voice to stay level. "Harper," he called, "talk to me. Stay with me. How's your pain?" A beat, then a faint voice, strained but still present. "Bad," she said. "Left ankle. Think it's stuck." Jack's jaw clenched. His mind instantly mapped the possibilities: a jagged grate inside, an exposed bar, a collapsed edge. The worst kind of trap. One that held tight without letting you bleed out. One that waited for you to freeze or drown. He looked up at Cal without anger now, just urgency. "Do you have a pry bar?" Cal stared at him, processing. Something shifted in his stance. Not hesitation, decision. Wordlessly, he turned back to the truck, pulled a 4-foot iron bar from the side rack, and handed it over. It was cold and heavy in Jack's hands, a tool made for leverage. That moment marked the shift. The blame, the frustration, the protocol, all of it gave way to purpose. Cal wasn't the problem. Dana wasn't the system. They were all just people standing at the mouth of something broken, doing their best to fix it before time made it permanent. Jack took the bar and nodded once, firm. Now they were all in it together.
The final lock gave with a sharp snap, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the creaking metal easing back into silence. Then everything moved at once. Jack and Dana each grabbed an edge of the grate, lifting with the kind of focus that silences pain. The weight was staggering, years of rust and neglect pressed into a single frame of steel, but the adrenaline made it manageable. As they hoisted it, Cal shoved the pry bar underneath with practiced precision, jamming it deep into the gravel lip. The grate tilted and held. Nova, sensing the moment, stepped forward. She planted her front paws against the concrete and leaned, bracing herself against the rising slab of iron, like she understood exactly what was happening. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. Every fiber of hers wanted to go in, to find Harper herself. The gap they created was barely 18 inches high, just enough to crawl through, just enough for one person and a miracle. Jack clipped a tow strap from the grate to the hitch of Cal's truck, reinforcing the hold. Then he turned, dropped to his stomach, and slid inside. The first thing he felt was the temperature. The concrete floor sucked the warmth straight through his jeans, a sudden biting cold that seemed to come from the stone itself. Water soaked his elbows. The flashlight beam jittered with each movement, revealing a slick, claustrophobic corridor. The air was thick with mildew, metal, and something harder to name, the heavy scent of time passed in silence. He crawled deeper, 10 feet, 15. At 20 feet, he saw her. Harper Lane lay curled on a jagged ledge of broken concrete just above the trickle of water that now moved faster than before. Her hair was wet and clinging to her face, her sweatshirt dark with moisture. Her leg twisted at a wrong angle, pinned beneath her in a way that made Jack's stomach knot. Her phone, cracked and flickering, lay face down beside her, still chirping every 60 seconds, loyal to the end. She stirred as his light hit her, eyes fluttering open with the brittle hope of someone caught between sleep and something worse. "Hey," Jack said, his voice soft, steady. "It's okay now. EMTs are on their way. I'm going to splint your ankle and get you out. You're not alone anymore." He didn't say it to fill the space. He said it because in that moment she needed a voice to tether her back to the world. She needed to be seen, to know her pain wasn't being witnessed by no one. She nodded, barely. Her lips moved, but the words didn't come yet. Jack reached for the flannel shirt tied around his waist and tore it into strips. He slid his flashlight under her knee, then grabbed a jagged wooden slat that had once been part of the culvert support frame. He wrapped the fabric with fast, deliberate hands, watching her breath hitch and slow. "You're doing great," he murmured. "We're almost there." But when he moved to lift her, she cried out, soft but sharp enough to stop him. Something was wrong. Her foot wouldn't budge. Jack shifted his angle and reached down into the water. It was colder than before, higher too.
His fingers searched around her boot, probing blindly until they found the culprit. A hook. Not just a snag, a bent piece of rebar, long rusted and sharp, curled through the loop of her sneaker like a trap. It had caught her mid-fall and held her there, just enough to prevent escape, but not enough to be obvious at first glance. A cruel, random wedge of metal that had become an anchor. He had two choices: lift her with it still in place and risk tearing her foot apart, or cut her free. "Knife," Jack called back, urgency but not panic in his voice. A second later, something slid in across the floor. A small folding blade, its grip worn smooth from use. Dana's, no doubt. Jack took it without hesitation and leaned in. "I've got you," he told Harper. "This might pull a bit, but I'm going to make it quick." She didn't answer. Her head lobbed to the side, her skin pale and damp. Jack slid the blade beneath the leather loop and began sawing, not gently, not carefully, efficiently. The fabric resisted for a moment, then gave with a quiet rip. The boot loosened, her leg moved. The water was at his wrists now. He closed the knife, pocketed it, and reached around her shoulders. She was feather light, shock and dehydration having stripped her down to nothing but breath and pulse. But in his arms, she felt like memory, the weight of responsibility, of one more life that could be saved if he didn't let go. He pulled her into a crawl. Each inch forward felt like fighting gravity. His arms strained against the uneven floor. The tunnel seemed narrower now, more hostile, as if reluctant to release its hold on her. But Nova barked. A sharp, precise bark, once, then again. Jack focused on it, let the sound guide him. Not fear, not warning, a beacon, a call. He kept moving. As they neared the opening, the light from outside grew stronger. Jack blinked as his eyes adjusted. He saw silhouettes now, figures crouching at the mouth of the culvert. Dana was there, kneeling low, arms outstretched. Cal stood behind her, toe strap taut. And to the side, barefoot and blinking, a man in slippers, someone from a nearby house, drawn by sirens and instinct. "Here," Jack shouted, shifting Harper's weight so her head was cradled against his arm. "Take her arms, easy." Dana moved first, her grip firm and practiced. Cal followed, pulling from beneath. The neighbors stepped in without a word, bracing their feet. Together, they lifted Harper out of the tunnel and into the crisp, open air. Jack emerged last, soaked and gasping. He paused on his hands and knees at the edge, chest heaving, not from exertion, but from everything that had just not gone wrong. Harper was bundled in blankets within seconds. A paramedic knelt beside her, checking vitals. Jack stayed where he was for a moment longer, watching Nova press her body to Harper's side, gently resting her head near the girl's hand, like she'd waited her whole life to finish the job. And Jack, finally, let himself believe they'd pulled her back from the dark. The culvert no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a threshold, one they had crossed together. EMTs moved with practiced calm, wrapping Harper in warming blankets, slipping saline into her veins, and speaking in those low, rhythmic voices that do more than gather facts. They gather people back into their own bodies. "What's your name? Do you know where you are? Can you wiggle your fingers?" Simple questions that tethered her to the world again. Harper's lips were tinged with blue, but her eyes were alert now, wide and brimming with tears that mingled with the dampness on her cheeks. Her fingers clutched the fabric of Jack's sleeve with quiet desperation, not fear, but the kind of need that only appears when you realize someone actually came. "You heard me," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "Or you heard it." Jack followed her eyes to Nova, now resting against the stretcher, head down, body pressed against the metal frame, like she was guarding Harper from everything that had come before. The barking was done. There was no more signal to send. "She heard your alarm," Jack said softly. "Then she made sure I did." There was no heroism in his tone, just truth. He didn't look for credit. He never had. But what he said next stayed with Harper longer than anything else.
Sometimes it's not about saving someone, he said. Sometimes it's just about not looking away. Under the glare of the floodlights, Cal stood a few yards off, arms crossed over his chest, staring at the cut locks scattered in the grass. He didn't speak for a while. When he did, his voice wasn't defensive. It was low and rough, like a man who'd finally accepted what couldn't be undone. "We had a complaint last week," he muttered. "Boardwalk panel near the river bend. Said it was missing. I flagged it. Got passed around. Then it got bounced." He didn't look at Jack. He didn't need to. His next words weren't for anyone in particular, but they hung in the air like a contract. "I'll make sure it doesn't get bounced again." It wasn't an apology. It was better. It was a vow. 3 days later, Harper Lane left County General on crutches, wearing a medical boot and the faintest grin that trembled but held strong. Her mother met her at the entrance, tears in her eyes, and Nova, officially a local celebrity by now, greeted her with a soft nose nuzzle and a quiet whine. The town council convened in an emergency meeting that same week. Work crews returned to the riverbelt by Monday. New grates were installed, warning signs posted, and the old culverts were flagged for immediate review. The town had moved slow before. Now it moved fast. On Friday, the Willow Creek Gazette ran a story on its front page. "Veteran and rescue dogs save missing woman." Below it, a photo. Jack in the background, uncomfortable as ever, and Nova in the foreground, ears perked, eyes bright, chest puffed just a little. She looked like she knew what she'd done. Jack clipped the article, folded it twice, and slid it into the top drawer of his desk. He didn't need it for himself, but he kept it anyway, because Nova was in it, and because every so often, even a quiet man needs proof that listening is more than passivity. It's presence. It's choice. That night, at 10:17 p.m., the house was still. Jack stood in the doorway to the kitchen, hand wrapped around a mug of coffee ground lukewarm. Nova stirred by the fireplace, ears twitching slightly, as if waiting for something that never came. There was no bark, no whine, no pacing, just silence. But not the haunted kind. This one felt lighter, like breath held too long had finally been exhaled. Jack set down his mug. On instinct, or maybe in honor, he picked up his phone and set the alarm to 10:17. A simple tone, a nod to the moment that had changed everything. When it chimed, he clipped Nova's leash to her collar and opened the front door. They stepped outside into the clean night air, not because something was wrong, but because something had been made right. Far beyond the trees, up on the hill, a young woman was asleep without nightmares of water and concrete. Down by the river, new barriers stood with bold lettering, warning and protecting in equal measure. The culvert no longer whispered. And on Mill Road, a man who once built his life around silence found something stronger in the sound he almost didn't hear. He had waited too long to get up that first night, but when he finally did, he hadn't stopped. Not until she was back under the open sky.